specifically, like, what does it mean? How do you identify it? How it can change and why that matters for your rights, risks that you might face and next steps. Um, okay. And then just briefly, I wanted to give you guys kind of an overview of CARE Chicago. So CARE is a civil rights and advocacy organization that fights to promote and defend the rights of Muslims in America and other marginalized groups. And we are available as a resource for community members who experience discrimination or harassment at work, school profiling, retaliation, other civil rights concerns, and then, of course, immigration. And if you guys want to take a picture of this screen so you can get our contact information. You can also fill out an intake on our site. Okay, so, oh, I keep forgetting to click. All right. And then just as a disclaimer, this information is not legal advice. To get, specific legal advice about your case, again, you should submit an intake on our website at carechicago.org to set up an appointment with either myself or another staff attorney or Hina, and then we can kind of go through the details of your case and give you more specialized advice. Okay. All right. So before we get into it today, I think I want to give kind of a brief overview of our immigration system. So immigration law is federal law, and different agencies handle different parts of the system, and a person's options. Oh, sorry. And a person's options depend on, oops, my bad. How did I do that? Okay. A person's options depend on like where they are. Are they inside the country or outside the country? How did they enter? What, whether they have a current status, and whether they're in removal proceedings. And we'll get into those concepts a little bit later. But the three kind of primary agencies are housed under the Department of Homeland Security. And so DHS handles most of immigration enforcement and benefits in the US. And within DHS, there's three primary agencies. It's USCIS, or the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. So USCIS handles applications for immigration benefits, right? Affirmative petitions. If you want to apply for a green card, if you want to apply for naturalization, if you want to apply for a work permit, TPS, DACA renewals, affirmative asylum, if you want to petition for a family member or do an employment-based petition, all of that is going to be through USCIS. ICE, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but these are sort of like the Interior Immigration Police. Okay, they deal with detention, arrests inside the United States, and then removals and deportation. Okay, and then we have CBP, or Customs and Border Protection, and they are the agents that will search people and things around ports of entry, right? So you'll see CBP at airports, you'll see them at land borders, and they're usually doing like inspections and things like that. And they're dealing with like issues of admission, right? So like, are we going to admit this person into the country? And then I want to talk a little bit about the Department of State and specifically consular processing. So if there's a person outside the United States who's looking to come in, the Department of State will handle the visa through the U.S. consulate abroad. So typically the process starts with CIS or USCIS, but then when it gets to the point of the person, the immigrant looking to have their interview and actually get the immigrant visa stamp, that is going to happen at a U.S. consulate. Okay, so when someone says, oh, and then actually I think on the next slide, we're talking a little bit about immigration court. So this is another sort of important part of our immigration system. So the immigration court is actually not part of DHS. They're technically under the Department of Justice. And the immigration court is kind of exactly what it sounds like. This is when an immigration judge will decide the outcome of your case. And they will rule on like removal cases, defensive asylum, which we'll talk about a little bit later, withholding of removal, which is a concept kind of related, withholding of removal and CAT, both concepts sort of related to asylum, and bond, and also, plenty of other forms of relief. But if you're in defensive proceedings, if the government is looking to remove you from the country, typically you're going to be in immigration court. Okay, and then quickly, so then when someone asks like, or when someone says like immigration has my case, the first question is like which agency, right? Is it CIS? Is it ICE or the immigration court? Is it a consulate, right? So that answer can change based on the facts or circumstances of their case. And then of course that will change like the process, the timeline, risks, and like even legal strategy for how they might try to get more immigration benefits, right? Okay. And then another concept that I want to talk about are visas. So just very simply, a visa is permission to enter the country. Okay. And there are basically two kinds of visas. There's a non-immigrant visa and an immigrant visa. So a non-immigrant visa is kind of what it sounds like. It's somebody who wants to enter the country, but it's for a temporary stay, for a limited purpose. Okay. It's like someone is coming, for a limited period of time, whether, it's like for schooling is a popular one, right? Like an F visa, or a B visa for tourism, right? And so these visas, if you get a B visa, that doesn't mean that you can necessarily then stay in the United States forever. You can stay for the limited period and for the limited purpose that's been granted to you. Okay. And then there are also immigrant visas, and this is for individuals who are seeking permanent residence, right? And so this is a visa that allows a person to enter the US and as a lawful permanent resident and stay, right? You can live, work, and stay here permanently, assuming, sort of no other issues with your, the facts or your situation. Okay. So then I want to talk a little bit about these concepts because they're sort of related and they kind of they have some similarities, but they don't exactly mean the same thing, right? So there's lawful status, being undocumented, and work authorization. So let's kind of go through each one of these. So lawful permanent residence, where maybe a concept that we're familiar with, but that just means green card, right? That means you have permanent residence, you can live and work permanently in the United States. Non-immigrant status kind of sounds like non-immigrant visa, right? If you have a non-immigrant visa, that means that you probably have a non-immigrant status, meaning you're allowed to stay in the United States and perhaps work, right? It kind of depends on the status that you have. But it's a temporary lawful status for a specific purpose, like tourism, like studying or something else, right? And then there are folks who are undocumented, right? And so this means the person does not currently have a lawful immigration status. And this can happen because a person entered without inspection, right? Like let's say they, entered through the Mexico border and just never encountered any immigration officials. They might be undocumented, but it can also happen if like, let's say you overstayed a visa. Once you overstay that visa, you're also out of status. You also become undocumented. Okay. TPS, we're going to also talk about a little bit in a later slide, but TPS is another example of the sort of like provides temporary protection from removal, and it can also come with a work authorization if you apply for work authorization. But again, it's not a status that can lead to a green card, and it's not a permanent status. And it's the sort of the same concept with DACA. DACA is deferred action for childhood arrivals. That means you don't necessarily have a lawful status, but the government can't remove you for the time that the DACA is in effect. Okay. Pending asylum is another concept. There's like plenty of people who've applied for asylum, but haven't heard back one way or another from the government. They haven't gotten a decision. So, right, that means that you have an application pending, and generally, like you can remain in the United States while your case is being processed, right? Like while your case is pending, you can stay. With that being said, it's not asylum pending is technically not a lawful status, or it's not a permanent status at least. And it does not automatically provide work authorization. You get to apply for work authorization 150 days after you've submitted for asylum, or about 5 months. And then another concept is like a visa is not the same thing as status, right? Like you might have a visa stamped in your passport, but you could still be out of status if that visa is expired. Okay. Oh. Okay. So we kind of briefly touched on TPS in the last slide. So TPS stands for temporary protected status, and it's for people from countries that the DHS has designated because of conditions in that country that make it difficult for the person to return, right? It's something happening in that country that makes it unsafe or impractical for people to return. Usually it's like armed conflict, or maybe there's a natural disaster, or some other sort of like extraordinary, usually temporary condition. TPS generally provides temporary protection from removal and also eligibility for work authorization. Again, this is one of those statuses that does not in and of itself lead to a green card, citizenship, or really any other permanent status. So if you have TPS, you might be able to get a green card, but not through TPS. It would have to be through some other eligibility category, say if you marry a US citizen or something else, right? And I want to kind of talk a little bit about TPS because it's kind of been in flux. So the US government is trying to end TPS for many countries, and immigrants are challenging the government's actions, right? They're through multiple lawsuits. And I think the Supreme Court heard arguments about TPS, I think in April 2026, about Haiti and Syrian TPS designation, but it could, once we get the decision on that, it could have implications for other countries' TPS status as well. So again, the current posture of TPS is unstable and it is country specific. So TPS is not just one program with one deadline. It goes country by country, and every TPS holder needs to know like their country designation, what's their registration period for that country, or the re-registration period, when is their work permit expiration date, and kind of just keeping updated and abreast of like any USCIS or DHS announcements about like changing deadlines and things. So right now, these are the countries that are designated as having TPS today. I find that the TPS, like USCIS chart, is kind of confusing to read. So I screenshotted this today from the USCIS site. This is like this is the TPS status for Lebanon, and I thought we could read it together. So Lebanon TPS is only available to people who are already in the United States. And specifically, so this continuous residence in the United States since October 16th, 2024. What this means is that TPS is only available to those folks from Lebanon who entered the country at least as of October 16th, 2024 or earlier, right? But if you came in, unfortunately, at least according to this, if you came in on October 17th, 2024, you would not be eligible for TPS, Lebanon TPS. Okay. And you also have to be physically present in the United States also since November 27th, 2024. Okay. The original registration window ran from November 2024 to May 2026, May 27th, 2026. There you go. Was automatically extended through November 2026. So people who are existing beneficiaries, like folks who have TPS now, you originally had it through May 27th, 2026, but as of, I believe today, you have it for an additional 6 months, right? So now it's through November 27th, 2026, okay? And again, that's if you continue to meet the TPS requirements. Sometimes TPS is automatically extended so that if you have status, great, like it's just automatically extended and you get the benefit of that. But sometimes you have to affirmatively re-register. And so you can check this USCIS site and it will tell you, what you need to do and if you need to take any action to re-register. But if you're not sure, definitely, make an appointment with an immigration. They can help you figure that out. Okay. Let's see. And then I also want to talk about DACA. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And again, this is also not a lawful status in the sense that it doesn't lead to anything permanent. It doesn't lead to a green card. It's a form of deferred action. And what that means is the government recognizes that they can remove you from the country, right? But they are they are deferring that action. They're saying we're the government is electing or choosing not to remove you or not to pursue removal for a period of time, and it's usually 2 years. And typically, you also get you're also eligible to apply for like a work permit or work authorization as well. So right now, the posture of DACA is that USCIS says that it is continuing to accept initial or like new DACA requests, but it's not processing them. So, if you meet the eligibility requirements, you've never applied for DACA before, and you want to apply, there's nothing, preventing you from doing so. You can, and perhaps you should, but you should also know that it's likely that USCIS is not going to take any action on your DACA petition. It's sort of just going to remain there. Yeah, not being processed. Okay. And then, so yeah, DACA's in just sort of like a legally fragile situation, I guess. People who currently have DACA should focus on timely renewals. And people, again, who never applied can technically submit new requests. It's just that they're not going to be processed. Like just a practical warning is that DACA recipients should renew early and keep copies of everything, and also avoid traveling, really avoid traveling, but also definitely without any legal advice, don't travel. I think that's what we have on DACA. And then next I want to get into affirmative versus defensive, but I want to give kind of a brief overview of what asylum is. So asylum protection is for someone who fears going back to their home country because they're or they have a well-founded fear of future persecution based on acted categories. So because of their race, their religion, nationality, particular social group, or political opinion. Okay. So there are two kinds of asylum, essentially. Affirmative asylum, which is for folks who filed with USCIS when the person was physically in the United States and was not in removal proceedings. That means they, entered the country, they applied within the year, and have not been referred to the immigration court. Defensive asylum is an asylum that's filed in immigration court. And that's because the person is already in removal proceedings, right? They've already been referred to the immigration court. Their case is already being heard by a judge, right? A judge is going to determine whether or not this individual can stay in the country. And the person, as a defense to deportation, they are raising asylum, right? That's why it's called defensive asylum. It's a defense to deportation. But conceptually, it's almost identical, right? You have to show that you were persecuted or have a well-founded fear of future persecution back home because of one of these 5 protected grounds. Okay. So yeah, affirmative asylum starts with USCIS. Defensive asylum happens through the immigration court before an immigration judge. Affirmative asylum is at the USCIS asylum office, and usually you get interviewed by a USCIS asylum officer. There's not going to be like a government attorney at the interview, right? It's not supposed to be adversarial. If your application at that interview is rejected, then you get referred to the immigration court. Then you are in defensive asylum. Again, defensive asylum, it's a little bit more adversarial. You're in front of a judge, you're in court. There is an attorney for DHS present. The immigration judge ultimately decides the outcome of the case. There's going to be testimony. You're going to have to give evidence, and there might even be cross-examination. Okay. So again, where your case is pending matters, right? So a person with a USCIS asylum receipt is going to be in a different procedural posture than someone who got a notice to appear in immigration court. And that was another good point. So typically the way that your case will get sent to immigration court is by receiving something called a notice to appear, an NTA. Okay, how do you figure out if you have a hearing, right? So the best way to figure that out is to go to this site. which I'm realizing is sort of difficult to remember this URL, but you can also just Google EOIR case search. And EOIR just stands for Executive Office of Immigration Review, and that's like the entity that houses all of the immigration courts. And so what you would do to figure out if your case is before the judge is you put in your A number and you select your country of nationality, and it'll be a drop-down menu. And sometimes you have to kind of experiment with different countries of nationality if the facts of your case are a little bit complicated. Like, for instance, if you, for some reason, were born in Honduras, but you have like citizenship from El Salvador, if it doesn't come up, if your A number doesn't come up under Honduras, try El Salvador too. And if neither come up, it's likely that you don't have a case, before the immigration court. You have
Donna,
a
can I
oh, yeah.
interrupt for a second? Just ask you a question because there was a question related to what you're talking about in the chat.
Sure. For sure.
So, we talked about affirmative and defensive asylum cases, and then one of the questions was, what should one do when an asylum application doesn't show up in the EOIR system? So can you just briefly explain when an asylum application would show up in EOIR
Yeah.
versus when it wouldn't?
Yeah, absolutely. So your case is only going to come up in the EOIR system if you are in defensive asylum, which means if you have been referred to the immigration court, right? So it just depends if an asylum application or if your facts, your information doesn't show up in the EOIR system, you've got to kind of pause and try to figure out where your case actually is. If your case is not showing up here, you probably are not in removal proceedings. You're not before an immigration judge. And so an agency is dealing with your application, in which case, potentially USCIS, right? That's typically the first entity. Like when you first enter the country, you want to file your application with USCIS. So then what do you do then? If you submitted something with USCIS, typically you'll get back a form from USCIS that has a receipt number in the upper left-hand corner. And you'll want to take that receipt number and search that on the USCIS website to figure out the posture of your case with CIS. Okay. Yeah, so again, if your application doesn't come up in the EOIR system, don't panic. Just confirm if your case is with USCIS. You can also contact the immigration court if you want to be sure, and like provide them your A number and see if they can like pull up your information. But if not, then it's likely that your case just isn't before the court. Okay. And then I want to talk a little bit about work permits. So, a work permit basically answers the question, can I work? Right? If you have a work permit status, it's just permission to work in the country. So to get a work permit depends on your category or on like what immigration benefit you have. Some statuses authorize work like only for a specific employer, particularly if you're doing like if you're here on an employment-based visa, right? You might be limited to work for this employer, this individual. But some benefits allow a person to apply for a work permit, and then of course, you can work wherever you're able to find employment. Some pending applications do not allow you to work immediately. For instance, you submit your asylum application, asylum applicant, unfortunately, you don't get a work permit immediately. You have to wait around 5 months before you can petition or apply for that work permit. And also like TPS holders, right? So they can generally apply for a work permit. DACA recipients with approved DACA, right? They can also apply for a work permit. Green card holders can work incident to their status. So if you have a green card, you don't need to go apply for a work permit also, because if you have a green card, that means you're able to live and work permanently here. Okay. And then I kind of want to go over some misconceptions or sort of ideas. So one misconception is I have application, so I have lawful status. Exactly true, right? Just simply filing an application does not, you have to await approval of that benefit. But while upon submission of that application immigration benefit, remain here and wait while that application is processed, right? Okay, another misconception, DACA is a path to citizenship, right? We talked about that. DACA itself is not a path to citizenship. DACA is simply means that for the period that DACA is valid, the government can't remove you from the country. Unless, of course, right, like other facts could make that not true. If you commit serious crimes or something, then that would change, right? Another misconception, TPS means I can get a green card, right? TPS alone doesn't create a path to permanent residence. It doesn't create a path to a green card. But, certainly some people who come here on TPS later, have a family or, apply for asylum or have other options or other avenues that become available to them that could lead them to a green card. But there are many statuses like DACA, like TPS that, in itself does not lead to a green card. Another misconception, asylum, you just have to show fear, right? I just have to be afraid to go home. That's not strictly true, right? You have to show that you are afraid to return home because of persecution based on one of those protected grounds that we talked about. So because of your race, your religion, your national origin, your membership in a particular social group, or your political opinion. Oftentimes I have folks who want to apply for asylum because of economic hardship, right? It's hard to find a job or things like that. And those are, they feel like valid reasons, but unfortunately, just in the eyes of the law, they're not. Yeah, before I end my portion, I think, and then there's a quick update on USCIS. So we were talking a little bit about asylum. Right now, there are 40 countries that are on pause, meaning if you are from one of these 40 countries and you're submitting a petition to USCIS for asylum, you're welcome to do so. It's just not going to be processed. Same thing like what we talked about with people who want to apply for DACA for the first time, right? A brand new DACA application. They've never applied before. You're welcome to submit, but USCIS likely will not process your application. It'll kind of just remain there. And that's right. And that pause is regardless of when you entered. Also, that we've been getting increasing reports of canceled interviews or naturalization interviews. And I think my advice for you would be to just keep very good records of everything. And if you're, considering international travel, definitely get legal advice before doing so, before filing any affirmative petitions, right? Like we just talked about all these different applications that you can submit. But whenever you file something, you are assuming a risk, right? You are making yourself known to the government and you're opening yourself up to inspection. And so before filing anything, you want to meet with an immigration attorney and talk about your, to the extent you have any criminal history, if you have any removal history or just, history coming in and out of the country, if you've missed a court date, it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer first. Keep copies of every immigration filing, keep copies of every receipt notice you've gotten, approval notices, all of it. Just be good about record keeping and yeah. I think I will.
Thank you, Shana. And hopefully this was useful. And again, we have one more presentation from Luciano Edota from Illinois Venezuelan Alliance that we'll be discussing what is the travel document from Venezuela. I know there's a lot of things have changed as well in Venezuela, so we'll pass it to Luciano. In case if you assist someone from Venezuela, so just to be informed.
Yes, thank you, Diane. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of the immigration lawyers who are here and social service agencies have worked with Venezuelans, have assisted Venezuelans, and so I thank you in advance for everything you've done for them. There's about approximately 50,000 Venezuelans that came to Illinois and Chicago, and so they're around in everywhere, right? And we get calls every day regarding their situation. I think I should share right now my presentation, right?
Yes, you can share your screen.
Yeah, there you go. So, the one thing Venezuelans right now, they basically they're in limbo, right? Because they came into the country, right, when they did. Uh, they left Venezuela in very dire situations. These were people who lived in rural areas, and they more likely never had a passport because they didn't have to travel internationally, right? So, but when they decided to leave, they probably just took their ID, which we call cedula, and probably the birth certificates of their kids, right, and their own birth certificates. So, and somewhere along the way, when they had to cross, the Darien jungle, all these documents got either wet or lost, and those who were, perhaps more preventive, they put their documents in plastic bags and they managed to survive. But more likely, a lot of the Venezuelans came without travel documents. The most important documents that they need at this very moment, it's their birth certificates and their cedula, their ID. Okay. The birth certificate, they come in so many different forms. Some of them are written by hand, the older ones. Some have a format and still written by hand. Some of them are typed. So here's the thing. Venezuelan birth certificates can be acquired, can be obtained. If they have a family member in Venezuela, they have to call their family member and say, "Can you get me a birth certificate?" Because all they have to do is just go to the registrar, the local registrar in their small town or in the city, the cities in Venezuela, and get a copy, and then they can take a photo of it or a PDF and send it via WhatsApp, and get a hold of it. So, and the other document is a little harder. If you never had one, you're not gonna be able to get it unless you're in Venezuela. But at the very least, they should know the number. They should know the number of their ID. So Venezuelans, we all know our ID number, just like Americans know their social security number. So that number is very important when you are going to apply for, issuing either a passport or a salvoconducto. And also the information that is within the birth certificate. There's a book, there is a reference number. All that information is going to be asked in the application to obtain, for example, the electronic travel document. So, which is a salvoconducto. So you may be asking yourself, what is a salvoconducto? Salvoconducto is just a document that the Venezuelan government issues. Now they're issuing it online, because what happens before, they were only issuing this in Venezuela, and so you had to have a family member that could go and pick it up for you, meaning that you could apply online and then somebody had to go pick it up, or you would have to hire some kind of intermediary, a travel agency, to process the salvoconducto. So what ended up happening was that there was corruption. People who were fake, they were doing this supposedly service, and then people would show up with this document at the airport, and the document couldn't be verified. So what the government did just recently, this came up like a week ago. They took control of this whole process. They put it online, and they decided to send the document in a PDF to the person who applies. So what you're seeing in the picture is the actual document, which is a PDF format. It has technological validation elements within the document, and a QR code. And this code is what allows authorities to verify the authenticity of the document. Oops, sorry. So I have embedded here, I'm not going to click on them because it's going to go and it takes a little time, but there is an instruction document that you need to read very carefully. It is in Spanish. They don't have the English version. So, but nowadays, with artificial intelligence or ChatGPT, you can, somehow get a translation done. And there's a document that explains all the steps to apply, and there is the actual application. And so those are the two links that are there. Please note that I put the PDF in the chat. That chat has the links embedded, okay? And that should be, Venezuelans who have had a passport before, they should be able, and they lost it, all right, or it has expired, they should be able to get a salvoconducto. If they have children, you can register the children within your own salvoconducto application, okay? The thing is, you need to have a credit card. So you're not going to be able to pay with this with anything else but a credit card. And it's $60. So at the time of the application, you need to also have a ticket, an airplane ticket. So they recommend that you buy your ticket, with 15 days minimum and in advance, and then apply, and you should be able to get your document within 5 days. So you still have a 10-day cushion there, just in case. Oops. Hold on. Okay. I'm sorry. I think I may have the...
You could click on the presentation, Luciano.
Which is...
Right, the yellow on the top.
on the top
Right there. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. I'm using an Apple computer, which is a little different for me. But, so anyways. Yeah, so as I said, these are the two links, and there's one that is the instructions on how to complete the application, and the application is on your right-hand side. Okay, it's important to understand this because when I was doing research, I couldn't understand, what this was. I saw the instructions, but I couldn't see where the application was. So I had to go somewhere else to get the application. I don't know why they have it separately, but that's the way it is. And so I put the links very explicitly there. Okay, the other possibility is to get an actual passport. And the key thing about this is that you have to authorize a relative of yours, and it has to be a close relative, either a parent or a brother or your grandmother. It has to be somebody who's a blood related relative. And so there is a process to complete an application, and there is the link. They say that they can actually deliver this passport within 72 hours, and this passport gets picked up in Caracas. This can only be picked up in Caracas. That means that if you're in a small town in Venezuela on the west side of the country, I can do the application, we can do the application on this end, right? But the family member will have to travel to Caracas and pick up this passport within 72 hours. Of course, this is all done through a website, email. You have to. The payment is very high. I think it's like $350. So there's money involved. That sometimes people here, Venezuelans, don't have that kind of money. But thank God some agencies have stepped in and have helped. Yesterday, for example, there was a mother with 3 kids, and she had actually done a salvoconducto. Salvoconducto was cheaper. This is a lot more expensive, but the agency stepped in to help her pay for the fees. As I said, this document is picked up in Caracas, 72 hours. The family member has to pick it up, okay? And the important thing about this is that there is an additional form that needs to be downloaded and completed. And that is the form that authorizes that family member to go pick up that passport. Once that family member picks up that passport, then obviously that family member needs to put it in a FedEx and ship it to Chicago. So it's not only more expensive, you also have to pay for the shipping expense with FedEx, which will probably be $100. If you are working with a Venezuelan client and you need assistance, do not hesitate to call us, to send us an email, and we'll try to step in to assist you in whatever way possible. Thank you so much.